television was first introduced in America in 1930 and became a household item in the 1950s. Since then, millions of Americans tune in to watch their favorite shows. But it is obvious that as the years have gone by, television has become much racier. American television shows have become less of a mirror of society and more of an instigator of new social norms. Networks and companies take advantage of television's ability to reach millions of people instantly to broadcast certain ideas or opinions to the public. Television has always been something that pushes the envelope on what is okay to watch in America and what is socially unacceptable. Society was a very different place in the 50s than it is today, and much of that has to do with television and what we as viewers are allowed to see. The television was introduced in America in the late 1930s. Though once considered a luxury to have in one's home, by the time the 50s rolled around, it became much more attainable and affordable for most American families. With such new technology, broadcasters wanted to know just exactly who was watching. So they gathered data and broke it up into certain demographics, the most prevalent one being, of course, the tight-knit middle-class white families. This was the only demographic that the broadcasters catered to. They made shows about the good old average American family, shows like Leave It to Beaver, Lassie, The Honeymooners, and even I Love Lucy, featured only the classic American stereotype. These shows were broadcasters' safe bet that many families would be pleased with their programming. Minorities, for example, were not generally shown on television due to the racial sensitivity that was prominent in many 1950s homes. This was a topic that was considered uncomfortable for many families and was generally banned from viewing time. And due to the opinions of most top broadcasters, when minorities were shown, especially African Americans, it was with highly offensive characters that were most often used for comic relief. Some entertainers, such as Al Johnson and others, even went to the extreme and went blackface, a practice of white men painting themselves black. Sexuality was also a very controversial topic. If bedroom scenes were shown, twin beds would be shown and all physical relationships were hidden away in subtle subtext. Even Lucille Ball in I Love Lucy was not allowed to say she was pregnant, but rather used euphemisms such as expecting or with child. Television producers were so deathly afraid of offending their audiences that they didn't even show toilets. An episode of Leave It to Beaver was pulled because of the toilet shown, but was later re-released as long as only the toilet seat was featured, making it the first toilet to be seen on television. Then the 60s rolled around. With the United States heading into the war with Vietnam, television to many Americans was an escape into a world of genies in bottles, witches, and millionaire hillbillies. But some viewers were sick of the classic 50s shows and yearned for something more contemporary. All in the Family was the show they were looking for. The show gave viewers a much more frank, funny, and slightly taboo look into the real world that they lived in. A world of African Americans and husbands who loved their wives and even poked fun at politics. This show, along with others on television in the 60s, helped convey women as more complex characters than just housewives. Suddenly, women were no longer a symbol of household values, but instead were put into a sexual light. Many shows, such as Gilligan's Island or I Dreamed of Jeannie, were heavily criticized because of the women's exposed midriffs and plunging necklines. Though while all this was going on here, many people were interested to know what was going on in Vietnam, which was the first war to ever be televised. These clips of battle brought a gloomy and gruesome reality of war many Americans had never experienced before. In the 1970s, we tried to legislate certain censorship laws that would universally change the way television was watched by Americans. But the 70s brought along with it many advocacy groups that were not afraid to speak out against the oppression and unfair treatment they felt. This baby-booming generation brought along more educated viewers, and companies quickly learned that they had a new main demographic. Case after case, the Supreme Court finally made the decision that television censorship issues should be left up to individual states. Another issue in censorship of the 70s was the creation and use of the X rating. The X rating was used to signify extreme sexual content or graphic violence not suitable for children, similar to today's R rating. But Americans became concerned when this rating was making its way onto their broadcast television programming. Suddenly, programs family had come to know and love were featuring rapes, teen pregnancies, and even talk of homosexuality. There were ads for bras and pantyhose frequently between shows. People were uncomfortable with knowing that their children could stumble upon dirty programs. The FCC tried to do its part by presenting its family viewing hour, which restricted times a show with certain criteria could be aired, but the court ruled it unconstitutional because it violated the First Amendment rights. The label of X soon disappeared as many of the criteria of X became more accepted in normal viewing situations. 1980s brought us cable television. Cable changed the way Americans thought of TV. There were suddenly so many more channels than just the major 3 or 4. There was so much more to watch, which made it harder for the government to regulate exactly what was on the air. Because of cable television's ability to offer more exclusive programming, broadcast TV was having a hard time keeping up. So, broadcast companies loosened many restrictions in order to make back the money they were losing. Broadcast television, as a result, then became more raunchy and free with ideas. The 1990s were a time when satire was a popular method of questioning society, which is something the government always likes to censor. Animated satires were becoming extremely popular. The Simpsons was a show that was often criticized for its tasteless humor and poking fun at current political and social events. Family Guy seemed to offer only potty humor and ridiculous caricatures of people in the media, and has since been under fire with the FCC for many of its jokes being deemed too inappropriate, sexual, or just insensitive. Following suit came South Park, a slightly more intelligent but just as obvious show that usually metaphorically criticized current events. South Park may have one of the worst names in the FCC book because of its constant pushing of the envelope. Oftentimes it crosses the line of just plain rude, such as animating the Muslim prophet Muhammad when they knew it would cause serious backlash from the Muslim community. Though still heavily criticized, all 3 of these shows carry on today, as there's always something to make fun of in America. As for today, there are hundreds upon hundreds of shows on every day. We are seeing the fruits of the labors of those who fought to make us aware of the true society around us, and aware of what we, as a viewer, have the right to see.